According to the National Law Enforcement Officers Memorial Fund, there are 800,000 sworn law enforcement officers now serving in the United States. This is the highest figure ever. Of those 800,000 that answered the call to 911, 200,000, or 25% of them, have some sort of substance abuse problem. Why? Well, in this episode of the KEV Talks podcast, I'm going to talk about substance abuse in public safety with my good friend Hank Smith. You'll hear Hank's story from a young EMT working his first cardiac arrest as a teenager to his time in the Air Force Reserve, and then we'll go through his 26 years in law enforcement. And we'll get more insight as to what can drive folks that see the worst in humanity depend on substances such as alcohol and drugs. Hank takes us through his own journey with alcohol, what he's learned from the good and the bad, how some departments throw their people away and others value them as they should and give them another chance, just like we do everybody else in society. So now, let's fly into Episode 8, Substance Abuse and Public Safety, with Hank Smith. Today I have the pleasure and I'm lucky to reconnect with a good buddy of mine, Hank Smith, where we're going to talk about substance abuse and public safety. And that's the title of this episode, Episode 8, Substance Abuse and Public Safety. Hank, thank you for helping me break into the video world.
Hey, I'm a perfect guinea pig.
There you go. Hank and I have spent a lot of time together in trainings and deployments on the incident management team, working together in the county we work together in. And we're going to get into and use an article Hank wrote called Substance Abuse and Public Safety that was published in, and I wrote the acronym down, the FBI Law Enforcement Executive Development Association from summer 2000. So just this past summer, right?
Yes, sir.
Was there. And he and I have been trying to connect for a while. A great opportunity to do that now. So it was published. I'll link to that in the video notes and the show notes, I guess now. But Hank, let's tell folks about you, man. Where'd you grow up? I know you're a military guy too, and so let's lead us into your background.
Awesome. Well, thanks for having me on, for one. I appreciate it, and I'm glad we finally got the ability to put all this stuff together. I know you talked about this a couple of years ago, and and when you started doing the between the firms, no, between the
Yeah,
flies,
it sounds like it, yeah.
your initial podcast and stuff, and timing wasn't right or whatever. But I'm glad we're able to finally link up and get this done. Yeah, I mean, I grew up, started initially here in Henrico until I was 6. Then we moved out to Palatine County from the time I was 6 to 16, and then came back here. Um, Largely because a lot of like the activities and stuff I was doing back here in Richmond. So my folks were spending a lot of time driving back and forth between there and Palatine and stuff. So, and because at that time Palatine was not what it is today. I mean, they weren't even traffic light, not even a flashing one.
Right.
So, and so if you wanted a hamburger, you had to drive, 35 miles into Midlothian or whatever. So, then after high school, or while I was in high school, I got started in EMS and volunteer search and rescue and stuff like that through the Civil Air Patrol and then the Appalachian Search and Rescue Conference, and then went to the Air Force, in the Air Force Reserve. Started off as a flight medic, and then later on, or down at Lackland Air Force Base as a military training instructor, like the drill sergeant, drill instructor for basic training.
Oh wow!
Did that full time for about 3 years. And the last 2 years was as a traditional reservist. After I came back to Henrico, got hired into law enforcement, and so after a while, it just got to be a lot. And after some pressure from the spousal unit at the time, separated from the Air Force and stuff. So, definitely miss the military. Being in the military yourself, it's kind of like a completely different job that you swear it sucks at the time, but when you get out, you're like, well, how did I ever get out?
Yeah.
I love being in the military, and I think coming into law enforcement gives you that ability to kind of continue along in that structured environment and stuff like that. because most law enforcement agencies are paramilitary, and a lot of ex-military folks in there, or veterans anyway. And so that was in '97. I just probably in my 26 and a half year now, and looking to retire here in a couple months. So
cool. Yeah, I didn't realize you were in Central Virginia most of your life too. Like I grew up over in Midlothian, so just not far on the outskirts of Powhatan. A little more developed, but yeah, not today. It's just grown so much in that area. It's like like a lot of places, I guess, but pretty nice to do that. What took you from doing a lot of medical stuff to getting into law enforcement? What drew you to that?
Well, I think I knew I wanted to be in law enforcement. I guess probably since I was like 12 or 13. Growing up out there, you'd see a deputy every once in a while, but a lot of times you saw troopers, and
Right.
sitting in the median running radar and stuff like that. And I was like, oh, I'm just fascinated by it. One of my friends, his dad was a state trooper, and I love going over their house, just walking around his car, looking and stuff. So you obviously have to be 21 to be a law enforcement officer. So I knew I wanted to do public safety, and EMS was something I could do public safety related that didn't have to wait for. So that started in the search and rescue arena. Sorry, my dog's fighting for attention.
All right.
So started off in search and rescue, and then got my EMT when I was 16. After I got out of tech school for being a flight medic in the Air Force, I got cardiac tech way back when cardiac techs were in the EMS chain.
Yeah.
The certification chain.
Did those turn into intermediates? Kind of.
I think so.
Intermediate, something like that.
Yeah, but I mean, here in the Richmond area, the protocols were the same as paramedics.
Yeah.
I think in some of the outlying jurisdictions, the protocols were a little less, but had a lot of latitude and stuff here. But anyway, shortly after that, got married, went to Texas, and was a TI down there. And then, but even then, I worked part time in an emergency room, and was about to go into a paramedic program when I got hired back this way.
Oh, cool. So it wasn't necessarily like hey, I want to get out of EMS and into law enforcement. You wanted to do that, but EMS gave you a way to be in public safety when you were younger, and then transition that way. Cool.
Yeah, got my foot in the door, and exposure to what the public safety arena is like and stuff. So, but I thoroughly enjoyed it. I love doing EMS. It's constant problem solving. Looking at a patient, trying to figure out what's going on. Coming up with your treatment plan, based on your protocols and what you have available, and get them to the hospital or whatever it is that you need to do. But I mean, it's as you know, every call is different. So
yeah. Did you draw on that experience when you then got into law enforcement, particularly kind of the troubleshooting, and you'd been exposed not just when you were younger, but of course when you were running calls yourself in EMS, to then did that help your transition into law enforcement? The military, certainly, I would imagine military boot camp versus police academy boot camp, similar, but you were pretty prepared for that paramilitary setting, and then kind of had some exposure to public safety. So did that help help that career transition?
Yeah. Well, I mean, in the EMS field, in the military, it's very can be very fluid and dynamic, and you have to be adaptable to different situations, or else you're not going to really succeed.
Yeah.
And as you know, you get in the fire service and EMS, and then law enforcement is the same way. I mean, sometimes you're in a constantly fluid situation that you have to constantly adapt to. And you can have the perfect plan, but as you know, no plan ever survives first contact. So it's all about contingencies and mitigating those contingencies. But yeah, I think the EMS exposure and being in the military definitely helped with that transition.
Cool. Yeah, and so in 26 years, you said that you're going on. Holy smokes! So in that, I imagine you've seen a lot. Not all of it great. right? The cause, which is that exposure. So what led you to put together this article to help raise that awareness, and really the article really speaks to, if you haven't read it, again, I'll link to it, but it really speaks to a lot of the things we'll get into. But there's a problem, a pretty significant problem, right, in public safety, but also in particular in law enforcement, which is, you really hit in on a bit in the article. But what led you to want to put this article together and get it out there, because it's a national, really international publication, right?
Right. Well, I mean, I guess you're asking me what time it is. I'm gonna have to tell you how to build a clock. So,
Yeah, big question.
um, I guess the article is drawing a lot on my personal experience. Um, some good, not a lot, a lot not so good.
Mhm.
So, as you mentioned, 26 years, you're exposed to a lot of stuff, and I think,
Yeah.
Anybody that's in this career field, especially if they're in an operational capacity, you're going to see a lot of stuff. And I think it's a lot of things that um, people really can't even imagine, what our responders endure, right?
Mhm.
And that leads to post trauma issues, potentially nightmares or anxiety or whatever, like, is this the call, and with the drastic uptick in attacks on law enforcement and stuff currently. I heard a friend of mine mention that, when you go out anymore and out on patrol, it's like playing Russian roulette. Hey,
Mm.
is this going to be the day
Right.
that either I get hurt, or I wind up on YouTube, or I wind up being prosecuted for doing my job and things like that. And that can lead to a lot of anxiety issues, and how people respond to that anxiety vary. Or those post trauma issues vary. Some people have healthy coping mechanisms where they go to the gym, they go to on a walk, they work out, or do meditation or some activities that are take their mind off of whatever it is that's circling around in there. Um, but sometimes people use substances to decompress. Whether it's beer, liquor, wine, or in some cases, sometimes it's more stuff that isn't quite exactly legal
Mhm.
that they are able to get their hands on or whatever. I think in those cases that's fairly rare, but it does happen. So so there's that piece, and I would say for me, post trauma stuff, and you're talking about early days in EMS. Remember very distinctly. I think I was 17. I was a senior in high school. It was like exam week, right before graduation, right? And this
Right.
is before, if you had a good grade, you didn't have to take the exam, which was never the case for me. I had to take all my exams, but so they did get that option to see students or repeat students.
Right.
um,
Same boat.
so, so um, me and my friend were a member of a volunteer rescue squad. Um, for me, I had a history exam the next day. So, it was a nice day out in the spring. We're like, hey, let's go, wash our cars at the rescue squad. So go do that. And our EMT instructors happened to be riding that day. And we're like,
Mm.
hey, if a call comes out, can we jump on? So, I'll tether myself to one instructor, and he tethered himself to the other one. Well, shortly after that, tones go out for cardiac arrest. And, I'm like, oh, sweet, cardiac arrest. Oh, awesome. And so we go to a church several miles out from where the squad house was, and this man's laid out in the middle of the aisle in the church, and started working him. Now, until that time, I'd seen deceased people before, but it was in a pretty sterile environment, in a
Mm.
funeral home, and people in a casket all made up and stuff,
Right.
but never anything raw like this. So worked him there at the church, got him loaded into a unit, hauled freight to the hospital, long ride to the hospital. I'm doing
From out
compressions and
there,
stuff.
yeah.
They're delivering defibrillation shocks, pushing drugs, all this other stuff. Get him in the hospital. They work him probably another 45 minutes. And then, while we're recovering our gear and everything else, and then find out, they called it and he had passed away. So, and that, had a very profound impact on me where, not only did I see this now, freshly deceased person, but, trying to save him and it
Mm-hmm.
didn't work out. So I get home that night and trying to study, wasn't happening.
Right.
Just, not sleeping. It was just playing those scenes over and over again. And it really wasn't, like a trauma scene or anything like that, but just the whole scenario. And the next day, took the exam, or at least the exam was in front of me, and unfortunately, my seat was by the window, so I sat there and was like staring out the window the entire time. And then, the teacher's like, "All right, you got 10 more minutes." And I looked down, I was like on page one, hadn't done, hardly anything.
Mm.
I think I wound up getting like a 40 on the exam or something like that. And I mean, my grades were good enough that it really didn't, impact whether or not I graduated. But
Right.
and my teacher had asked me, like a day or so later, like, "What happened?" And so I told him what happened. He goes, "I wish you would have said something. We could have rescheduled it." I was like, "I didn't know."
Yeah.
So, so that was that part. And then, over time, working as a ER tech, one of the local hospitals here in Richmond, and then other EMS calls and so forth, that starts to compound, which at that time, I mean, I didn't know anything about post trauma or anything like that. You just kind of learn how to compartmentalize it, stuff like
Yeah.
that. So, fast forward, through the military career, where I was really like kind of introduced with to drinking for socialization or
Oh
whatever.
yeah.
I mean,
Military
who ever
ramps it
thought?
up a notch.
Yeah, yeah. Who ever thought you'd drink in the military?
Yeah.
And there were a couple times that I really caught myself. I'm like, man, I've been like drinking every day for like 30 days. I need to stop. And because I think that I have a family history of alcohol issues and stuff like that. Um, so fast forward to the police department. You know, I would drink socially, but sometimes there'd be a beer that sits in the refrigerator for several months. I wouldn't even think twice about it.
Mm-hmm.
But later on, after um, divorce number one, that kind of changed. Where that coupled with a new assignment within the police department was a little bit more stressful, a lot more responsibility. Um, and then two, kind of trying to drink my way through resentments or whatever, it just started to compound.
Mm-hmm.
And unfortunately, but fortunately, in some respects, ultimately, it created a situation where I was charged with DUI, and and that was pretty catastrophic for me, both mentally, ego, blow to the ego, and all that other stuff all over the
Yeah.
news. And I'm like, gee, what has happened? um, the chief of police at the time was pretty evident what was fixing to happen to me. The sheriff of our county gave me the opportunity to be able to transfer over to the sheriff's office, and that's where I am now. But in that time, I started attending AA. Went pretty regularly for about 18 months or so. I also did like a substance abuse program through a mental health provider. And my clinician that worked with me was very spot on, very candid guy. He was in recovery himself and had been for many years and stuff like that. Completed that program, didn't drink or anything like that. But after about 18 months, I started taking a EMT class with oldest son. Um, all my EMS stuff had expired by then, and I'm like, this would be cool for father son activity and that kind of thing. So, in the meetings, kind of where the classes conflicted with the meetings I went to regularly, and just kind of got in the habit of not going. I'm like, all right, I got this, whatever. And so I probably went about real probably about 4.5 more years or 3.5 more years until my second wife had a issue at work where it looked like it was not going to be very favorable for her, and she was also not drinking at the time. And I don't know if it was her or me suggested, well, hey, I'm gonna go get a 12 pack and just try to chillax. And probably one of the worst mistakes that I could have made, because I went and bought it, and that started like an 18-month run in drinking. And if people don't realize this, that if you stop drinking and you pick back up later on, you in a very short amount of time, you're at the level that you would have been if you would have never stopped drinking, as far as frequency and tempo and that kind of stuff. So in that time in between, there was a class that was put on by one of the members of our IMT, called the Metro Richmond Public Safety Leadership Academy.
Right.
There was many jurisdictions within the agency participated, and it was all flavors of public safety, so fire, EMS, law enforcement combined. And I think the overarching premise, other than being besides being a first line supervisor school,
Right.
was to help these folks network. And so, if there is a regional event or incident or something like that, that the first time they're seeing their teammates is not in the huddle, right?
Right. Yeah.
And so part of the class was there was a block on wellness that a mental health clinician taught, as well as another officer that talked about the mental health pieces. And there was a question that came up in the original planning meeting or whatever that dealt with substance abuse. And by that time, I was a couple of years out from that DUI incident and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember he kind of looked at me like,
right. If we could only think of someone who could speak to this.
Exactly. So I was like, you know what? Okay, I'm a pretty candid, open person. At least I am now. I think the older I get, the less F's I have to give. So like my bucket meter is pegged at this point. So, I said, yeah, well, let me see what I can do. So I did some research, to mental health and stuff like that. And hang on for a second. Zeus. Sorry.
Real life intervenes here on the podcast. That's what's up. It's all good.
Comes at the top.
That's right.
Trying to get him to stop, not dig up the carpet. So anyway, so I come up with this class about about public substance abuse and public safety, and presented some data. And one of the pieces of data was that just in law enforcement alone is that there's a 25% of law enforcement just in that discipline have issues with substance abuse. And in the class, I'm like, all right, so everybody don't look around at your table and try to figure out who the drunk is, but
right.
But that's
but it's some of you,
right? But overall in public safety, you're looking at in the 30s,
yeah,
and more than likely that that data is pretty, or that figure is pretty low, because of our insular nature of I'm not going to share that information, or thinking that it's an IA or an HR trap,
right.
in the survey, and they're not going to answer honestly or whatever. So the numbers are probably a little bit higher. But the class was received very well, and at the end of the class, I say, well, how do I know all this stuff? And I said, I'm not I don't have an MD or a PhD or anything after my name. I might have DA for dumbass, but I said, I are one. I say, my name's Hank, and I'm an alcoholic, and kind of go into my story about how things kind of ramped up, and a lot of that is relational issues, bad divorce, bad breakups, from girlfriends or whatever, and that stuff compounds. And when you add in work frustrations, whether it's trauma issues or internal things going on within your agency, it can be a lot. I remember prior to the DUI that I would get home from work, I would still be in my work clothes and have a beer at the refrigerator, have a second one to go outside and have a cigarette, and get a third one to go upstairs and get changed, and then the fourth one when I got back downstairs, all in probably a period of like maybe 30 minutes.
Right.
And I mean, that was, kind of just getting started, unfortunately.
Mm-hmm.
And please don't, think I'm making light of any of this, because I'm not. Things could have been much, much, much worse.
Yeah.
And they turned out to be very worse for a lot of people. So I go through that first evolution of sobriety, and then start on that 18-month run of drinking again, and that part about it picking back up where you left off, where like
Mm-hmm.
if you had never stopped, is very true. Um, you know, after the wife number two had lost her job, things really deteriorated with us, not because of the employment part, but I think the effect of losing the job, took on her, and just things just really deteriorated.
Sure.
At the time, we were trying to work on things, and then that wasn't really panning out very well. Sold our house, moved into separate residences and stuff like that. And I remember, getting home from work, and just drinking beer all day and for the rest of the night. And I mean, like a lot.
Yeah.
And one of the things, at least for me, and I think other people could probably relate to this, is that sometimes when you drink, it only just exacerbates whatever you're feeling at the time. And if you're pissed at the time, it only elevates the level of festivity
Right.
that you have.
Yeah.
Or for me, it kind of allows me to get up in my head without supervision, and then those resentments and things start spinning, and it just makes the drinking even worse and so forth.
Let me
Finally,
before we jump to the end of the article, quick, because it's
commercial
one great background. I'll say only to share, because like you talked about, like you are one, I are one. Like there's folks listening, I'm sure, and there's folks that were in that class, and there's folks that will be. They're like, oh, something happened to me, and I went down that route, or I chose to do that instead of talking to somebody, or some of the healthier things you talked about. And I think it sounded like, and I was talking to one of my best friends yesterday that I was a corpsman with in the Navy, and I started volunteering as a firefighter EMT in Chesterfield when I was really young too, but more so impact. And I went to some car accidents and things. But we're talking about, when you're so young and you're thrown directly into horrible situations where you're going to see dead people, and who knows what way. And it could be when you're 17, it could be when you're 19 or 20, which is still crazy young, right? If you think about the let's talk about think about, and nurses go through stuff too, but if I go all the way through nursing school, I'm a few years older, and I might get exposed, but I'm not going straight to the front of the line on the street where stuff happens, unless I did a ride along, right? Or something like that. And it depends on your field, but we were talking about then, and hopefully it's better now, and I'm not as connected with EMS services or fire and things as far as volunteer, but as far as kind of a no nonsense onboarding, like you're gonna see bad stuff. We have these services set up, and it seems like in general public safety has that, and hopefully that's proliferated a bit through the volunteer agencies that just, some don't have the infrastructure, some, like where I am here in Blacksburg, are like are bigger than, I mean, it's amazing with the equipment, the stuff they have. But I feel like when you get that young, and then it's not really dealt with, to your point, it's festered, it stays in that attic in your head, and then you keep piling on it. And then you mentioned the military, which is like the university of, folks are like, oh, my kids, where'd you go to college? And I was like, well, I was in the military when I was in college, so my experience was a little bit different, than other folks. But it definitely, between that and public safety, part of that culture, and you mentioned it, of not asking for help. And then, what, it is fun to hang out and have beers and stuff with your friends, and do all that kind of stuff. But it's, I just did the episode before this, I read this book, Lost Connections. And it was about, like, there's these 9 disconnections you can have, like, for folks that are depressed. Well, a big thing of it, one of them had to do with this problem really had to do with these folks that had been abused. They gained a bunch of weight, so they weren't attractive to abusers, right? And so, but they thought, oh, you just eat unhealthy, so we'll help you with that. But that was really the smoke, not the fire. Where like this, the smoke is the alcohol use, right? The fire is really the trauma in your head, the bad experiences, work, those kind of things, and it's getting to that and digging to it seems required. That sobriety requires. It's tough, I would imagine, to even get to the point where you're like, look, to make that decision to even go get the help, right? Because I'm sure there's plenty of folks that are at the point where they know somewhere in their head, I need to get help. I'm not doing what I'm supposed to do, but they don't have a catalyst maybe to take that step. What should they do, or what catalyst is there, or motivation that you just for that, just to even take that first step, and then dive in more into the the article and things like that. But did something just click where you're like, I just got to go do that? I know, like, I had a panic attack, so I was like, oh, this is awful. So I need to change something, right? Because same thing in the evening. Oh, it's easy to sit down and have some drinks, or it's easy to just fester and work out and act like I'm dealing with it when you're not, right? You're not talking through things. What was what could someone do if they're in that place where they're not feeling like, they don't want to ask for help? You know what I mean? Because they're probably not
Right.
consciously thinking of it, maybe.
Well, I guess the biggest thing is to try to get help before you're forced to get help.
Mm.
Like in my situation, what clicked were the last ratchet on the handcuff, and
Literally, yeah, true.
that's a bad situation to be in, and and it certainly impacted my career. But you know, God's will make things happen the way they are supposed to happen, right?
Mm. Yeah.
Um, you know, it, that sent me to the sheriff's office, where I got a completely, still in law enforcement, but a completely different experience, but had the opportunity to share my experiences, both professionally and personally, and things like that, and hopefully make an impact in several people. But to
Right.
go back to what you were asking, the biggest thing is to if you are wondering to yourself, yeah, do I have a is this an issue? If you have to ask yourself that, then it is.
Mm. Right.
And it's not, as I explained to a friend of mine that was struggling with some issues. When I was telling him my story, he's like, "Man, I don't drink hardly as much as that." No, I mean, I'm like, whoa, wait.
All right.
It's not the quantity, the quality, right? So I mean, and what I mean by that is, why are you drinking? And he's like, "Well, just take the edge off." Okay, well, that could be one, or I get aggravated and I need to have a drink, calm down. Well, that's flag number two. So if you have to ask
Mhm.
yourself, well, do I have a problem, or should maybe I'll look into this or whatever, then chances
Yeah.
are there probably is
Yeah, and that could
one.
be, I
And
mean, like, so what's the edge? And it could be there's variations of what the solution could be, right? It could be total sobriety. It could be you deal with the issue and then you're able to not use that as a crutch, because that
right,
varies by person too, right? As far as kind of a blanket solution, I guess, if you'd say it, because everyone's different. But to your point, it seems like if you're asking questions or you're using something to deal with something that you're not really dealing with,
right, correct.
right? That's a good
So I mean, and
checklist.
and like with me, if um, I'm genetically predisposed to
Mm.
alcoholism from my family,
Yeah.
from my mom's side and my dad's side. So that's one issue. Um, and the career field, the stressors, and everything else, and me making poor choices as far as how to manage those stressors didn't help either.
Mhm.
And when you drink, it feels good or whatever, and
Yeah.
it's a temporary relief from that. But when you get up the next morning,
Mm.
you're still have financial problems. You're still in debt. You still have no money. Or you're you still have asshole boss at work, or whatever it is that's driving that.
Right.
Or maybe a combination of all of it. Those problems still exist. And after a period of time, the only thing that that those using those liquid decompression the only thing it'll do will complicate whatever issues you currently have. So, my advice would be is if you are wondering if there's an issue, then maybe you ought to explore that either,
Yeah.
through talking to, a counselor or, EAP through work. There's organizations out there such as AA, NA, or whatever. There's meetings like literally everywhere
Yeah.
at all times of the day. If not in person, they're online that you can attend. And I remember the first AA meeting I went to. I mean, I was scared to death. I'm like, and you have your mind in your mind, what AA is going to look like. And I remember, going in to sit down in my first meeting and then listening to people talk. And then as they were talking, I'm like, oh shit, that's me. It's me. That's me. That's me. And it helps you realize that you're not by yourself in that fight. Um, and two, sometimes in it gives you the opportunity to talk to people that have been there, done that, got
Right.
the T-shirt, and how to better handle your problems and stuff like that. And I hear there's a lot of meetings, especially from some of the old timers and stuff, that they say that well, about AA initially was going to, when I go there, they're going to teach me how to drink responsibly or whatever. Well,
Right.
that's not
Nope.
exactly how it works.
Yeah.
So, but it does teach you how to deal with that deeper problem. And
Mhm.
one of the parts in the article that I write, is talk about we can think of people throughout our career that we've known, or
Mhm.
a person or multiple people that are were partiers, or they drank quite a bit or whatever, and they're always the life of the party and all that other stuff. But we ever stop to think about what causes that real heavy, intense drinking and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And a lot of times, the substance abuse part is only a small symptom of a much larger problem. Dealing with post trauma issues
Right.
or relational issues or whatever the driving force is. But in also in our culture, everybody wants to be or they don't want to appear to be weak. Right?
Mhm.
I mean, I would say there's a lot of there might be just a couple of type A personalities floating around in public safety.
Yeah.
You and it's very difficult to ask for help. And I know for me, and to some extent even today, um, that I wouldn't ask for help if I were drowning.
Yeah.
But it's a change in mindset, and there needs to be a change in our culture that it's okay to not be okay. And
Right.
because we ask our people to go out and do superhuman stuff and
Mhm.
to endure a lot of craziness, a lot of traumas, a lot of everything, and to not have any issues about it.
Right.
I mean, you think of veterans coming back from the various um, operations that we have going on throughout the world, and especially like our special operators and stuff that are, really in the, pretty intense stuff a lot.
Yeah.
And we ask them to do a lot of stuff for our country. In the context of public safety, we ask firefighters, cops, EMS providers to do a lot of extraordinary stuff for our community, and then to not be affected by that.
Right.
I think the public's perception is that we're infallible,
Hmm.
but I mean, that is definitely not the case. We're human too. Our military vets and operators are human too, and you can compartmentalize a lot of stuff, but for a certain amount of time.
Yeah.
But
That's
after
gonna
that,
it's gonna come out. Yeah.
right, one way or the other.
Yeah.
And I've listened to some podcasts of guys that are in tier one teams and stuff like that, and they talk about their issues with post trauma and the things that have happened with drug use, alcohol use, and so forth.
Yeah.
And that may be a temporary fix for a little bit, but it's definitely not a finite solution for that problem. So, um, you had asked earlier, what caused me to write this article.
Mm.
So writing an article is nothing that I've ever had an aspiration to do or anything. The only thing writing that I've ever turned in was, at a leadership school that I went to. I mean, that was about the extent of it. After going through the FBI leader program, you get emails all the time about, upcoming classes or whatever. Kind of like any other class you take, they're trying to get you back in to take.
Oh, yeah.
But usually, when I'm going through my in basket of email, that's one of the ones that's like a delete, delete, delete.
So, yeah.
And for whatever reason, this was like back in April or so, my email stopped on the an average group email from Lita, and I glanced at the screen and said, basically it was a solicitation flyer for articles for magazine. I was like, and I tell people I don't know, how this happened or how my email stopped on that. I know exactly how it happened. It wasn't, it was the good Lord saying, hey, take a look at this.
Yeah.
And so in the flyer, it said, what subjects they were looking for, which were, obviously leadership, articles, tactical leadership, and then there was a part in there about mental health and wellness response to mental health stuff, and then wellness. So in my, mind went to the class that I taught in the Metro Richmond school. So I'm like, so, saw the editor's email address, shot her an email, said, hey, first, let me say, just like I told you, I said, I've never submitted anything ever in my life other than a paper for a leadership school. I said, but I teach this class about, I said, it may be, a little taboo, but it's about substance abuse and public safety. And do you think this would be, something that would be well received, or however it was that I phrased it? And she replied back and said, yeah, I mean, I think our readers would enjoy something like that. A very generic, positive response.
Yeah.
Touchy feely.
Good job, man.
Exactly. Right. So the excuse me, had to be like under 700 words or something like that, which proved to be fairly challenging. And then you had to submit a bio and your picture and all this other stuff. So I sat down I was working an off-duty job. So you basically just had to sit at a desk and started to do a rough draft. The deadline was kind of short. I was about to go out of town and didn't think I'd meet the deadline. So I sat down just to, see what came out. And like within a couple of hours, I'd, bang this thing out.
Was it therapeutic? Because journaling is a good tool, right, to deal with stuff that I've found helpful. Did you find that it provided that a little bit for you?
It did. I mean,
you weren't about to say that, were you? You're like,
no. I don't journal. I don't write that. I mean, I have before, but I don't know. I don't know what to say. I'm basically writing a note to myself, and I don't know what to say. So, but banged out the article, and then you had to do a bio, right? So I looked up previous editions to see what people's bios look like, so it could be kind of consistent. I didn't want to write some big flowery thing, whatever that wasn't needed. Yeah. So when I looked at the previous editions, I saw the people that had submitted articles or had them published were all like PhDs, MPAs, all these acronyms after their letters. And then we'll take you back to what I was saying earlier. I don't have any acronyms that's my name other than DA for dumbass. So, and I'm like, and these chiefs of police and commissioners and stuff like that. I'm like, well, hey, look, I gave it a shot. So I submitted it. And prior to that, I met with our current sheriff, who was very instrumental in helping me get myself straight from the 18-month period. Right, very supportive, wonderful, wonderful agency head, and this was going to have our agency's name in it, and I didn't, and would be attached to her, in some respect.
Yeah.
And being a political officer, I didn't want to have any negative impact on her or anything like that, or the agency or the county for that matter. And so let her read it and told her how things had come about. And I said, so I wrote this. So before I send it in, I want you to read it and see what you think. And she read it and slid it back to me. She goes, send it. Do it. I want you to get that out there. And I was like, gave her a big hug and told her thank you and did just that. So the editor had said, it should hear something back by like June 5th or something like that. That's when they'd have, the selections made. And I didn't hear anything past that, did a follow-up email, didn't hear anything back from that. And I was like, okay, well, I got my answer. Yeah, hey, I'll try.
Yeah.
And then I get an email like a day or so later said, hey, sorry, been really busy, but yeah, you're going to be published. I'm like, what?
Dang.
So, I was like, well, thank you. I appreciate it. I was like, so like, I'll make sure that I, invite you to the red carpet, when I'm going to accept my award and stuff.
Nice.
Making a joke out of it. But anyway, so, it came out in the magazine. It's not typically a publication you see on a magazine rack somewhere in the pharmacy or
right.
whatever.
Yeah.
But in my biggest hope in this is that if anything, it sparks conversation within agencies about how they deal with um, issues related to substance abuse and with their personnel. Because in my first experience, um, it was pretty obvious what was going to happen in very short order. With no longer being employed by this agency,
Right.
and that's a pretty common practice, I think, in a lot of agencies, where you do all of these things, that expose us to these stressors, these traumas, and all that, and it's not just one thing that causes a substance abuse issue. It's usually, a compounding of issues. Those things translate to home, okay, and create issues at home. And it is just one huge spiraling ball of mess, right? And a lot of that can be attributed to work stuff.
Yeah.
And I think we owe it to our personnel that, like no call for service is ever the same. There's always mitigating factors in that call that, kind of affect your OTA loop, right?
Right.
And I think we should look at those personnel issues much the same way. That there is no one situation that is going to be the same as any others as far as personnel matters go. And not every personnel matter is terminal. And so when I was permitted to transfer to the sheriff's office, the that sheriff at the time was all about recovery and stuff. And
nice.
in our jails, he had created a recovery program for our inmates that had substance abuse issues and stuff like that. And that program still exists today. And our current sheriff is very much about that. And we've had personnel matters within the sheriff's office that have involved substance issues and stuff, and provided that that the degree of that issue, they were given help. They're directed to help regardless of what the issue is. But again, not every personnel matter is terminal, and you don't have to apply the knee-jerk reaction to every single thing. And I would just encourage police and or public safety administrators or agency heads or whatever to look at the entirety of the situation before deciding how to dispose of that. So I think as long as that member is truthful and candid about the situation and are willing to receive help, then I think we owe it to our people to do everything in our power to help them out. And we're charged by virtue of our office and being compassionate human beings to help people out on the street that we encounter on a call for service. And then,
Right.
a lot of times we go to extreme lengths to get them help that they need, right? So why won't we do that for our people?
That's a great point. I think too, your use of the OODA loop, right? Observe, orient, decide, act is not just for the sexy tactical stuff, the calls on the street, but the way that you said, or that I heard it too. So if you're a leader of a public safety agency or whatever level supervisor doing that for your people, right? So you're observing your people, maybe see that behavior, you're going to orient yourself to like what's really going on here. And then that key decision point where you're talking about, like, if we're going to decide to help folks that have committed crimes, right, and help get their substance abuse treated, why would we not do that for the folks that swore to defend others and to then still take care of those folks, and then that last part, act on it? I think is a great point, and really showed just awesome leadership, right? To say, like, I'm going to look at you first. I'm going to get to the fire behind the smoke that I see,
Right.
in this rough patch that's happening with you now. Yeah, that's pretty awesome.
And I would say, that 18-month run that I was talking about, it came to the point that I was obviously needing some intervention, right? And
Yeah.
the former sheriff and the current sheriff assisted in this as well, of directing me towards treatment. And I went and do a 28-day program to get myself straight. And there were a lot of things that I realized, a lot of revelations, and in looking inward, things that I needed to fix, and worked on fixing that there. And that's a constant progress through until I take my last breath. But it's always a work in progress. It's not anything you can snap your fingers and fix.
Right.
But it's something that requires a lot of work and a lot of practice. And it's not going to be perfect. There are going to be things that could be trigger mechanisms or whatever that pop up here or there.
Right.
But it's not so much what that trigger is, but how you deal with that stimulus, right? And if you get pissed off by the spouse, or somebody from your past that you have a resentment against, or whatever happens to pop up, are you going to go drink at them, or are you going to work that serenity prayer that says, do I have any control over this?
Right.
If I do, what can I do to fix that situation? But a lot of times we don't have control over it. So, a friend of mine in the AA rooms, and if you're not familiar with the serenity prayers, God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Which I default to with a lot of stuff. What can I do to fix this? And if I can't, then I need to let that go. But anyway, one of my friends in the room says, "Hey, the short version of the serenity prayer?" I'm like, "No, what's that again?" He goes, "Fuck it."
Nice. Took the shortcut for sure.
I was like, that's about it. Yeah.
There you go. I did an episode on faith, which for me in the past few months, whether it's religious faith or you believe in the trees or like whatever deity or just something bigger than yourself, right? Or how you define it, right? Which is a big thing of AA, like whatever you believe in or how you define it, God as you believe it, as you define it, it just helps, right? So say someone's totally not religious at all. To your point, you could cut out part of the serenity. You could shortcut just right to fuck it, or cut out the God part and just be like, look, what can I control? What can't I control?
Sure.
Go from there, and it still applies whether you're an atheist, Christian, like whatever that you believe. One thing too that you touched on earlier, I don't remember what time save it was, but 25% of LEOs, right, across all LEOs have substance abuse. And I did a quick Google. I'll put where I got this from. But so let's say there were like 660,000 law enforcement officers in 2021. That's 165,000 people. right? People that swear an oath, people that show up when, run toward the gunfire, as they say, when people are running the other way, into the burning house, sitting there like you did when you were young, or like they're older, doing CPR, trying to save your mother, father, child, whatever's going on. And I think, to your point, it's so, one, the news doesn't help, right? Because now it's 24/7. They're always looking for an angle too, just like somebody with a cell phone trying to catch something, not realizing that they're not catching the aftermath of the call when the weight of not being able to save somebody hits you, or you lose your buddy, or the other percentage, the other stats, with public safety, is divorce rates are higher, life expectancy is lower, suicide rates are higher, right? So this impression of, like, if it's out there that you have to be perfect, and it's just, oh, it's this altruistic, and you mentioned being excited, and I think we're all the same way, as we say, like, squirrely when you're younger, and you're like, yeah, I want to go to that call, and then you go, oh, that's the reality of that call.
Yeah, exactly.
And then when that builds and builds and builds, and you have layers of that, stuff in your heart and your mind and everywhere, it's like, oh man, it becomes super easy to pop a pill, have a drink, do whatever, or let the rage take over, all these kind of things. And the other term I like that you use, and that I've heard more interchangeably, is PTS, post traumatic stress, instead of PTSD, post traumatic stress disorder, right? Because, and how I've seen it, and jump into, is, right, it's not normal to see, horrible things, to see a body rearranged after a car accident, right? How it doesn't look when it was just walking down the street. And it's not a disorder to be screwed up by that, right? Repeatedly seeing stuff like that, or, having your friends killed in line of duty, or something, or just getting, firefighters, a lot of them get cancer, right? The rate is higher too. So it sucks. What have you heard the same, or, in your education on PTS versus PTSD, is that why you chose to use PTS in the article?
Um, no, well, and I kind of agree with you. That's not a disorder. I mean, it's almost a matter of fact.
Yeah.
And and I think when you put that disorder label on it, it has a negative connotation to it,
Mm-hmm.
and it kind of goes against that whole part of it's okay to not be okay.
Yeah.
I mean, look at what we do every day, or look what you did for 25, 30 years. It's okay to not be all right.
Yeah.
It's to be expected. And and the thing is that when you come to that realization, that you seek help, and there's
Mm-hmm.
tons and tons of resources out there.
Yeah.
And when you talk about rates, the percentages and stuff, in that article, I'll talk about some comparisons between public safety and regular society, or regular citizens.
Right. Yeah.
Right? So, in the community, the rate of substance abuse is less than 10%, compared to that 25 in law enforcement. Let's see, PTS rates, 7 to 19% of street law enforcement, and then the other part I threw in there, about 26% in corrections.
Yeah. It's
Um,
high.
and that's the highest of any career field. And there's reasons for that. In law enforcement, after a bad call, you can go to 7-Eleven, get a cup of coffee. You can get, go up door to door and talk to your friend, whether it's about your call, about that call, or just talking in general. Something other than process, or having to get back immediately to work. Firefighters,
Mm-hmm.
they get back to the station, back in the recliners.
Hit that
ice
kitchen
cream,
table. What? Yeah. Yeah.
right?
Here's a little shit between police and law enforcement, or fire.
So, but the corrections folks work either in the prisons or the jails. They don't have that latitude. After everything is cleared, that kind of stuff, they're back on post. They don't get that downtime.
I
But
wonder, that was, sorry, that was part of my question, is environmental, if that's a factor, because it's also not like you can then go, even if it's a tough ride home and it's a beautiful day, you're outside driving through wherever you live, right? You're in a jail or a prison, which I would imagine is a pretty horrible place to be. And then if something, whatever happens throughout that time, like you can't get away from it. And I wondered if it was the environment of it, at least getting some decompression.
It's a chronic exposure for about 12 hours a day. And wow. Even on your days off, quote unquote, a lot of times folks are volunteering to work overtime because the agency is short, and it's not and it's pretty much any agency. I mean, you look at police departments now. I mean, they have mandatory overtime for their personnel because they're so short and stuff like that. But that chronic exposure and continuous exposure to stressors, the yelling and screaming, the beating, banging, the verbal attacks, physical attacks, or whatever. I mean, it wears on you after a while. But 7 to 19% of street law enforcement, 26% of corrections, and that's compared to 3% in the community, 3.5% in the community. So, and then the substance abuse rates just in law enforcement 25 compared to 10% in the community.
Yeah.
But but whether it's community or in public safety, I mean, it's half of those that seek treatment for post trauma also have the coexisting problem with substance abuse. So because that's their mechanism to try to deal with that.
Yeah.
Which is may create a temporary relief, but it's certainly not going to be permanent.
And did you find, like you mentioned, employee assistance program, which I would imagine most agencies, most professional agencies have that, right? Most companies in general, whether they're public safety or not, have that. Is that an avenue that you used and that you found helpful to use a combination of that plus, private services? And do you have any advice for folks as far as which one to use or just reach out and try something?
Well, and the I guess my first evolution, I went to our locality's mental health services.
Okay.
They had a substance abuse program, and after that, I didn't see anybody. I didn't go to AA. It was just kind of, hey, I got this.
Gotcha.
Clearly, I didn't. The second time, I started to see a counselor, just a private counselor and stuff that had a specialty in post-trauma and substance abuse and that kind of thing, and deals with a lot of public safety personnel as well.
Oh, good.
I still see him every once in a while, basically as a tune-up. And saw him after treatment and set up, through the treatment center, confirm with them that I had, a counselor set up and so forth. So, the combination of, going to see him, and really, very rarely do we talk about substance abuse stuff. I mean, it's basically like, hey, how's things going? Talk about, different life events or whatever, and, nothing real serious unless it's something that needs to be discussed or whatever. But and because of that, instead of going once a week or once every other week, now I'm seeing once every 2 months, once every 3 months, something like that. So and I can attribute a lot of that to a routine attendance with AA, and because inevitably when you go to those meetings, somebody will say something that that you can relate to,
resonates,
or maybe something that's, and this has happened to me many times where I have something on my mind, and sure enough, that'll be the topic for the night. And that's nothing but divine intervention, and the good Lord looking out for you. So, the biggest is find. I mean, Google is a wonderful tool.
Yeah.
You can find a lot of help there, or if not, call your locality's mental health services, where and I think some jurisdictions call them community service boards. Or whatever.
That's what we have here. Yeah.
And if they don't have a substance abuse program themselves, they can surely steer you in the right direction to someone like that.
I ask because I would imagine that could be part of either a real or perceived barrier that, say, just using you as an example, or let's say someone has 10 years on the job, right? Pretty decent chunk of experience. They've been in whatever public safety program, both sick law enforcement, and then they go to talk to a counselor who just graduated, right, from
Right.
school. They have no relational experience. They're going to say, well, here's these steps. Let's follow the, you know what I mean? And so they can't relate either through, which is probably hard to get someone that has all the same things or can relate kind of to, because they were either in public safety and became a counselor, or they've worked a long time and specialized in it. So at least they've had exposure over and over again, which I think was a great thing. There was, in the city just down the road, I did the crisis intervention team training, which one I recommend. I think it's awesome training, but they were out in the field with folks, not the replacement mental health response. That's a whole different discussion we won't get into now. but they had exposure to it, right? So they weren't just going by the book and trying to tell you what to do because the book said it. It's because of the 200 other people that are in public safety I've talked to. But I think, and I've heard that can be a barrier because the impression someone might get. So you may try somewhere and it's not exactly a fit, but that doesn't mean stop trying, right? Like try another one. It's like any service, and right, the first primary care physician might not be your favorite or whatever, so go to another one.
Right. Well, I mean, after when wife number two and were going through, marital counseling and stuff like that, we went to go see one counselor, and the dude drove me. I mean, it was a waste of time. I
Yeah.
mean, got nothing out of it. The second one was much, much better. Obviously, I mean, didn't exactly pan out. But I don't think it had anything to do with the counselor. I can
Yeah.
but to your point, you got to find that right fit.
Right.
And in the abuse issues, it's kind of hard to relate to a fairly new counselor that is, their experience is based on the book.
Mm-hmm.
They can give you some academic insight or whatever, but I think, and there's a lot of folks that are in recovery that become counselors because they see the good and the positivity of that. And the benefit of that is, they can recognize the bullshit.
Right.
When you're trying to spin a tale and rationalize something, they're like, no, that ain't fine.
Right.
And because they've been there, done that, got the T-shirt, and they can call you on your bullshit, which is very helpful.
I was going to say it's super valuable. There's another. So we had an interview coming up with the director of the All Clear Foundation. So if people Google that are listening to this, it has similar kind of mental and physical resources, and I'll get into that more in the future episode. But also we'll put some links maybe in the video and the podcast description too. Just I know I've looked in other episodes I've done where you can kind of go search and find, like, wherever you live in the United States, your local mental health, and then of course through your employer you should be able to find your employee assistance program with your HR department or something like that. And it seems like big factors that I thought of, to two words, is not letting your ego and not letting the environment dictate like how you do or don't take care of yourself, which is super hard when you're not in the mind space to want to take care of yourself because you're just dealing with getting to your next shift or whatever. And then when you're in the environment of, hey, let's go, knock them back, or, you don't want to have the perception or whatever. But would you say in year 26 that it has gotten better though, throughout your career, as far as people talking about it more, just dealing even with, trauma or just the job itself, issues at work, outside of work, or do you think there's still a long way to go?
I think we've made tremendous progress. I remember when I first came on 26 years ago that, I mean, it was like taboo to even say, mention mental health, right? Or go to mental health. And there was several reasons for that. One, at that time, and it's not the case anymore, at least not with this locality. At that time, there was a lot of leak back from mental health to the police department. And so anytime anybody went there to get help, it was all over the place within a couple of days, right?
Dang.
And so people are like, well, forget that. I'm not, and so they didn't deal with stuff because they didn't want their business being put out there, whatever it was,
Right.
That has gotten exponentially better, and
Good.
to the point that it's not not even an issue. Um, but I think recognition of issues has gotten a lot better, and directing people to the resources they need has gotten a lot better, and the support has gotten a lot better. I mean, is it perfect? Not by any stretch of the imagination, but it has gotten a lot better than what it used to be.
Good.
And I think that folks are starting to realize that not everybody is infallible, and it's
Mm-hmm.
okay to not be okay.
Yep.
And the thing is that I think when we can stop judging people, right? There's nobody on this planet that's perfect,
Right.
and maybe try to empathize a little bit and put yourselves in their shoes, and how would you handle that situation that they may be enduring or whatever. And there's a lot of people that are great actors and actresses that are probably, well, not probably, that are going through probably one of the toughest and darkest times of their entire life, but put on their game face every day,
Mm-hmm.
right? And nobody has any idea whatsoever what they're dealing with internally. And I think when we realize that, the better off that we're going to be, and exercise some empathy with each other, not just with the folks
Right.
that we deal with out on the street, but with each other too.
It's a great. I was trying to think of something cool to say, but you just said it. So nice work. I mean, and it's so true. I mean, so I'll link to the article, right? I don't know if your contact info, if folks have questions, right? If they're like, hey, I need an idea if it's in there or not, but we can share that too. But also, thanks, man, not just for this podcast, but I know you've helped me. I reached out to you when I was having a tough time. Also, Hank's meme game is 100% number one. We spent months together getting ready for this big bike race, and then it was kind of like a pre-deployment workup, and then 9 days where we had a great time, and then also couldn't stand each other. It was like, just tell me the information, let's get it on. Imagine updating thousands of lines of spreadsheets so GPS devices work every day.
Right. No, I mean, good times. But thank you for the compliment on the meme game. I appreciate it. Actually, during NASVAX, I was able to actually create memes, which is even better. So ask Trevor about a couple of
Oh
them.
my.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Actually, when we get off the phone, I'll send you some. They're pretty classic. So
Nice.
um,
Yeah, for folks. So if you've listened to the show when it was between the slides, it's funny you say between the ferns because now I actually have 2 plants, and I didn't do this on purpose. It just looked good. Sorry, Zach Galifianakis. I'm not trying to steal your thunder. You're funnier than me anyway. But then and gosh, people I talked about kind of, I was on incident management team, planning section chief. So we have all of us that were planning chiefs into the planning section text each other constantly. But this guy's one I reached out to when I had a hard time earlier this year, and that we reach out to each other. And, for folks listening, if any of this resonated, just know you're not alone, right? And I think that's critical because you can feel like you're on an island. It can be so dark, you're unmotivated. Don't go down the road some folks have gone where they take their own life. Don't go down the road where you get caught in the spiral of the habit of coming home and taking whatever substance you choose to take, legal or not legal. If you need help, if you have ideas, reach out. Go to kevtalkspod.com. My contact info is there. I can connect you. Like I said, we've got another All Clear Foundation coming up, and lots of resources there. I'll link an article or the link to the article here as well, and we'll get a bunch of resources. But don't give up, keep fighting. Thanks so much for your service, everybody. Thanks for your service, man. Both in the US.gov, DoD, and public safety. I really appreciate it. I just really appreciate your time. First
and I
video.
appreciate you doing this. And feel free to link my information as well. I mean, I'll be happy to talk to anybody or any agencies or anything like that. I mean, I'd be happy to put on a class for in-service or whatever, because, I think a lot of folks don't realize how deep that issue is that, exists, and unfortunately it's that pink elephant in the room that nobody wants to talk about. But it's a matter of fact. It's, not so much the problem, but what are we going to do to try to mitigate it? So, and by you doing this helps tremendously. So I appreciate you for the work that you're doing.
Roger that. Thanks, man. Cool. Thanks everybody for listening. For now, I gotta fly.
Have a good one.